One of the most interesting studio executives to rise up the ranks over the last 30 years is Amy Pascal. She has had her fair share of ups and downs over the years, holding various roles and trying to find the right movies to develop. Sometimes she has a keen eye for promising material, and at other points she has spent too much money on the wrong project. But she is probably most well known for a stint running Sony Pictures. After serving as vice president of production at 20th Century Fox for a few years, she landed at Columbia Pictures in 1988, working primarily to help develop scripts, with Groundhog Day and Little Women among the movies she championed. In 1994, she was lured away from Columbia by Ted Turner, becoming the president of Turner Pictures. Among the films she greenlit was the Nora Ephron movie Michael, starring John Travolta. However, in 1996, Turner decided to sell his company to Time Warner, and most of the movies she developed did not get made. With Pascal's future at Turner uncertain, Sony Pictures CEO John Calley brought her back to Columbia, making her president and reporting directly to him. Funnily enough, her time away from the studio was so short that projects she personally developed when she was last there were still being worked on. A lot of the initial movies she helped greenlight in her new role at Columbia did not do well, although Big Daddy, Stuart Little, and Charlie's Angels were notable successes. Only 3 years into the job, she was promoted to chairwoman of the studio, so Calley had a lot of confidence she could turn things around. Her slate would eventually pick up in 2002, with Sony scoring the highest market share among the major Hollywood studios that year, thanks to box office hits like Spider-Man, Men in Black 2, XXX, Mr. Deeds, Panic Room, and Made in Manhattan. After John Calley retired in 2003, Pascal was then made the chairwoman of Sony Pictures Motion Picture Group, overseeing all movies. 2006 was a particularly big year for her, with Sony releasing films like The Da Vinci Code, Casino Royale, Click, Talladega Nights, The Ballad of Ricky Bobby, The Pursuit of Happiness, and Open Season. That same year, she was promoted yet again, this time to co-chairman of the entire Sony Pictures Entertainment Group, alongside CEO Michael Lynton. They became known for their working relationship, with Lynton often overseeing the business side of things and Pascal the creative side. They sought to produce a variety of films, with Sony making a decent number of comedies, prestige films, animated movies, and franchise pictures under their watch. This included working with MGM and Eon Productions on the James Bond movies, continuing their partnership with Adam Sandler and his Happy Madison production company, and greenlighting acclaimed Best Picture nominees like The Social Network and Moneyball. One particularly interesting decision made by Pascal was hiring 2 first-time directors on an animated movie that had already spent several years in development, titled Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Mostly known for the cult animated show Clone High, Phil Lord and Christopher Miller have been involved in an earlier draft of the screenplay but have been fired. Much to their shock, they were brought back and then promoted to directors. The pair credited Pascal's notes for making the movie more than just a series of wacky jokes, and for basically taking a chance on them and launching their directing careers. She also signed a deal with Aardman for them to make animated movies for Sony. Even though The Pirates, Band of Misfits was originally intended to be computer animated, after Pascal and Lynton saw the ships and other models, they requested that Aardman make it as a stop-motion film instead. As with any studio executive, sometimes not every decision made by Pascal and Lynton was a popular one. Following the release of Spider-Man 3, Sam Raimi started planning the 4th movie, working with a number of writers on the screenplay and wanting to make it as good as possible after his disappointment of how the last film turned out. Sony wanted the movie out by 2011, but Raimi felt he could not make Spider-Man 4 in that time frame in a way that would satisfy him. So he dropped out of the sequel, and Sony decided to reboot the franchise with The Amazing Spider-Man opening in 2012. It's interesting to think if they'd just given Sam Raimi the extra time he wanted, they probably would have had his Spider-Man 4 open that year instead of the Mark Webb reboot. Another project that did not happen despite excitement over released test footage was Genndy Tartakovsky's Popeye, supposedly due to Pascal's disinterest in the character. The budgets on some of their movies also began reaching massive heights, and the studio was criticized for overspending on certain projects. Men in Black 3 was one such film with a budget of over $215 million. Another example was James L. Brooks' box office flop, How Do You Know, costing $120 million, which is a tad pricey for a simple romantic comedy, but was a result of the director and cast fees adding up. Adam Sandler's movies would also end up costing around $75 to $80 million, which was seen as a bit much for movies like Just Go With It and Jack and Jill. Big tentpole action movies like The Green Hornet, Total Recall, White House Down, and After Earth all had budgets exceeding $120 million and would struggle, usually fail, to make their money back. While Sony did deliver the occasional modestly budgeted hit like Captain Phillips, American Hustle, 21 Jump Street, and This Is the End, and cut costs on the animated films by moving their visual effects and animation unit, Sony Pictures Imageworks, to Vancouver, they were still concerned that the studio was spending too much on some of their movies. And even though the studio had the highest market share of 2012, it dropped to 4th place the following 2 years. Amy Pascal's contract at the time was set to expire in 2015, but despite the occasional criticism of Sony's output, there was still the expectation it would be renewed. But then Seth Rogen decided to make a comedy about a North Korean dictator. When the trailer for the interview was released in the summer, North Korea immediately expressed anger at the premise of the movie. They even threatened to retaliate, but Sony decided to stick by the movie and release it. I mean, it's a gross-out comedy with Seth Rogen and James Franco. They're going to start an international incident over that? However, shortly before the film's scheduled release, Sony servers were hacked and private documents, emails, and even entire movies were leaked online. The group responsible, which was said to have some connection with North Korea, then threatened any movie theater that decided to show the interview. This led to theater chains refusing to show the movie out of concern over these threats, and the theatrical release was cancelled. It was instead released for digital rental or purchase. However, the main story that seemed to excite people was getting to read the private emails. They gleefully pored over those things, which I always thought was wrong. This was not a whistleblower revealing information that the public needed to hear for their safety. This was supposedly a group affiliated with a foreign dictatorship wanting to take petty revenge over satirical comedy. Some notable people did call out journalists and other folks for spreading these around, like Phil Lord, Chris Miller, and Aaron Sorkin. George Clooney was especially critical of the media for publishing what was in the emails, and the other studios for not standing by Sony. After all, as much as people use those emails to point fingers and laugh at Sony and their executive decisions, let's be honest, if the same sort of thing were to happen to Warner Brothers or Disney or Paramount, their internal emails would likely not be that much different. The emails that received the most condemnation were those written by Amy Pascal to producer Scott Rudin, which were considered racially insensitive. Criticism was also directed towards the pay given to actresses compared to their male co-stars. None of this was a good look for Pascal or the studio. The controversy surrounding the interview and what was publicly revealed in leaked emails, as well as the already growing concerns over film budgets, led to Amy Pascal being let go from her position at Sony. However, she did not entirely leave the lot, as Sony agreed to sign a 4-year first-look producing deal, with her making movies for the studio under her own production company, Sony Pictures. She would even become a producer on a few of the movies she had already greenlit at Sony prior to her exit as chairwoman. Tom Rothman, who was running TriStar Pictures at the time, was hired as her replacement, primarily due to his reputation for reining in costs at TriStar and from his tenure running 20th Century Fox. And he has done exactly that, helping Sony regain its box office footprint and keeping budgets reasonable. As for Pascal, her first producing credit was on Paul Feig's Ghostbusters reboot, on the film she'd greenlit as chairwoman. She also became heavily involved in producing the Spider-Man movies, working alongside Marvel Studios head Kevin Feige on the films with Tom Holland, and serving as a producer on the Venom movies. Pascal was the person who came up with the idea to make an animated Spider-Man movie, pitching it to Lord and Miller. They agreed to produce the movie, and the result was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Not all of her productions have been with Sony, though. Aaron Sorkin's directorial debut Molly's Game was originally set up at Sony, but it was then put into turnaround, with STX Entertainment eventually releasing it. Pascal picked up The Post, a screenplay about the Washington Post and their publishing of the Pentagon Papers, written by Liz Hanna. She sent the script to Steven Spielberg, who instantly decided to direct the movie, feeling it was a matter of importance to make it during Donald Trump's first year in office. 20th Century Fox released The Post, which earned Pascal her first Oscar nomination for Best Picture. She also signed on as producer on a new adaptation of Little Women, which she'd been trying to develop when she was still running Sony. In the end, Tom Rothman would be the one to greenlight the movie, with Greta Gerwig directing. Pascal would receive her second Best Picture nomination for Little Women, which was also a box office hit. In 2019, after her contract with Sony expired, she signed a new first-look deal with Universal Pictures. She's been so associated with Sony that her moving Pascal Pictures to a different studio was a bit of a surprise and seen as the end of an era. However, 5 years later, she has not produced a single movie for Universal, so it does not seem to have turned out a productive partnership. Most of the movies she has produced since then have been Spider-Man and Venom films. One of them was Across the Spider-Verse, which was hit with controversy when it was revealed that animators were required to constantly revise scenes after they've been rendered, which is not the normal process for animation. When asked about this, her reply was, "Welcome to making a movie." Weird way to respond to that. When the film was nominated for Best Animated Feature, she was curiously included on the Oscar ballot instead of co-director Joaquim dos Santos, even though that was not the case for the first Spider-Verse movie. She has managed to get a few non-Spider-Man related films off the ground. She was recently a producer on the critically acclaimed tennis movie Challengers for Amazon MGM Studios. She is also producing Phil Lord and Chris Miller's next directorial effort, the science fiction movie Project Hail Mary, also for MGM, and Noah Baumbach's new movie for Netflix. Amy Pascal is a producer and executive that, like any other, has made a lot of good decisions and also plenty of detrimental ones. And while her biggest legacy will be the infamous Sony Pictures hack, as you can see, her career encompasses a lot more than just that. See you next time.